You think you know which cities survive a zombie outbreak. You're thinking big walls, dense populations that can organize defense, maybe some coastal fortress city that locks down and holds the line. New York fortifies Manhattan. Los Angeles turns into a militarized zone. Chicago becomes a frozen stronghold. Sounds reasonable until you realize that every single advantage you just imagined is actually the thing that kills everyone inside. Here's what most people don't realize about urban survival during a zombie apocalypse. Population density isn't a defensive advantage. It's a countdown timer to collapse. Every 1,000 people in your survival zone is 1,000 potential vectors for infection, 1,000 mouths demanding food that stopped being delivered, 1,000 panic decisions that cascade into catastrophic failure. That fortress city you're imagining, it's not a castle. It's a pressure cooker with an expiration date measured in days, not months. The cities that actually survive aren't the ones with the most people or the biggest walls. They're the ones with geographic advantages you haven't considered, infrastructure that works when logistics collapse, and population numbers low enough that organization beats chaos before chaos becomes permanent. Let's be real for a minute. If you're banking on urban America to save you during the undead apocalypse, you've already made your first fatal mistake. And if you're serious about understanding which locations actually give you a chance, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we break down survival strategy that separates fantasy from functional reality. So here's the thing. We're not talking about hiding spots or temporary havens. We're analyzing cities where the combination of geography, resources, climate, military assets, and population density creates an actual survivable scenario. Not comfort, not thriving civilization, but survival with enough breathing room to make it past the first 6 months when 90% of humanity is either dead or undead. The rules for this scenario. We're dealing with Romero-style slow movers with a 24-hour incubation period and fluid contact transmission. Fast enough to overwhelm the unprepared, slow enough that organized groups can manage them. Outbreak starts simultaneously in major population centers worldwide. You've got standard notice, 48 hours of confused news coverage before it's undeniable, then 72 hours of cascading infrastructure failure before you're on your own. No military rescue coming, no cure incoming, just you, whatever city you're in, and the question of whether it has what it takes to outlast the horde. Most cities don't make it past month 3. The math is brutal. High population density means rapid infection spread, which means social collapse before adequate defense, which means the living become the minority faster than they can organize. Add infrastructure dependence, supply chain failure, and geographic choke points that trap people rather than protect them, and you've got urban death traps pretending to be civilization. But 7 cities break that pattern. Here's why they survive when everywhere else falls. Number 1, the Front Range Defense Corridor, Colorado. Yeah, we're combining Colorado Springs and Cheyenne into one survival zone because tactically they function as a unified defensive region. You've got NORAD buried under Cheyenne Mountain, Peterson Space Force Base, Fort Carson, Schriever, and F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne. That's not just military presence. That's the most concentrated collection of hardened military infrastructure in North America. Here's what that actually means for survival. Trained personnel who understand logistics, command structure, and defensive operations. Weapons stockpiles that can actually equip a civilian defense force. Communication systems that work when cell towers die. And most critically, underground facilities designed to survive nuclear war, which means they laugh at zombies. But the real advantage isn't the military hardware, it's the geography. The Front Range sits at 6,000 feet elevation, with the Rockies at your back and high plains to the east. Zombies don't climb mountains well, they don't navigate rough terrain. They don't survive winter exposure at altitude, where temperatures hit -20 and stay there for days. And the population density between Colorado Springs and Cheyenne is sparse enough that infection spread faces natural breaks every few miles. Sounds perfect until you consider the obvious problem. Winter at altitude kills the unprepared just as efficiently as zombies. The Front Range survives because the same conditions that slow the horde also demand ruthless resource discipline from the living. You're not defending against human waves of zombies in Colorado winter. You're defending against cold, managing heating fuel, and ensuring your defensive perimeter doesn't freeze solid along with the shambling corpses outside it. Survival rating, 8 out of 10 for the first year. Long-term sustainability depends on maintaining those military supply chains and preventing internal collapse when cabin fever meets command structure. But if anywhere in the continental US has the infrastructure and defensive advantage to organize civilization's remnants, it's here. Number 2. Honolulu, Hawaii. I know what you're thinking. Island paradise becomes island prison, trapped with the infected, no escape, death trap. You've watched too many zombie movies and not enough tactical geography lessons. Islands aren't traps. Islands are the only naturally quarantined defensive positions on Earth, and Honolulu has advantages that turn isolation into survival. Start with Pearl Harbor, operational naval base with ships, trained personnel, and most importantly, the infrastructure to maintain maritime operations when mainland ports collapse. That means Honolulu isn't isolated, it's mobile. Supply runs to abandoned coastal cities on the mainland, evacuation of survivors from West Coast collapse zones, fishery operations that feed a population when stored food runs out. The Pacific isn't a moat, it's a highway the dead can't travel. Now add the population math. Oahu has about 1 million people pre-outbreak, which sounds terrible until you realize that's a controllable number if you act fast and ruthlessly. The island is 597 square miles. That's enough space to establish quarantine zones, defensive perimeters, and survivor consolidation areas without the crushing density that dooms mainland cities. And because it's an island, you're not managing infinite vectors of infection spread. You're managing a contained outbreak with defined geographic boundaries. The climate does half your work. Zombie decay accelerates in heat and humidity. Bodies break down faster. The horde thins itself through environmental attrition faster than anywhere on the mainland. You're not fighting endless waves. You're fighting waves that have an expiration date measured in weeks, not years. But here's the catch that kills the unprepared. Islands survive on imported everything: food, fuel, medicine, manufacturing supplies. Honolulu has maybe 14 days of food inventory for 1 million people under normal consumption. When the ships stop coming, the clock starts ticking. Survival depends on immediate draconian rationing, rapid agricultural development, and accepting that survival means 1,800 calories a day and fish-heavy protein, not paradise living. Survival rating, 7 out of 10 for year 1. The geographic advantage is undeniable. The military assets are real, but long-term survival demands a level of agricultural development and resource management that tests every leadership structure. Get it right, and Honolulu becomes humanity's Pacific stronghold. Get it wrong, and it's Easter Island with zombies. Number 3, Anchorage, Alaska. This is where we separate fantasy survivalists from people who understand how environment kills almost as efficiently as the undead. Anchorage isn't just isolated, it's isolated by geography that actively prevents southern migration of the infected horde. And here's the thing about zombies in extreme cold. They freeze solid. Not metaphorically, literally freeze. Romero shamblers don't generate body heat. They're ambulatory corpses. When ambient temperature hits 10 degrees Fahrenheit, muscle tissue freezes. Neural function ceases. They become lawn ornaments until spring thaw. Anchorage averages 5 months below freezing. That's 5 months where the zombie threat is effectively neutralized, reduced to frozen statues. You can systematically eliminate while they can't fight back. And the isolation factor isn't just distance, it's access. There are exactly 3 ways into Alaska: air travel that stops when fuel runs out, maritime access that requires operational ports and ships, and the Alaska Highway through Canada. That's it. No interstate network connecting to infected southern populations. No endless stream of refugees carrying infection north. You're separated from the mainland collapse by 1,000 miles of wilderness that filters out 99% of potential vectors. The population math works because Anchorage only has 300,000 people. That's manageable. That's defendable. That's small enough that community organization beats chaos before chaos becomes terminal. And critically, it's a population that already knows how to survive extreme environment. These aren't city people pretending to be survivors. These are people who stockpile food for winter as baseline behavior. But Alaska survival has a price tag measured in preparation and brutality. Everything you need is either already there or you do without forever. No Amazon resupply, no food deliveries, no manufactured goods pipeline. Anchorage survives because it's already semi-independent from the lower 48 supply chain. But that means accepting that survival is subsistence, living with occasional fishing and hunting success, not modern comfort. And the cold that protects you also kills you if you fuck up. Lose your heat source in January and you're dead in hours. Defensive operations in -30 require equipment and discipline that makes summer survival look easy. You're not just fighting zombies. You're fighting an environment that punishes every mistake with hypothermia and death. Survival rating, 9 out of 10 for Anchorage, because the environmental advantages are overwhelming and the population is small enough to actually organize. But that rating comes with a caveat. You have to be the kind of person who already knows how to live in Alaska. Soft Southerners who think survival means hardship don't make it through the first winter. Number 4, Fargo, North Dakota. Yeah, I said Fargo. You're thinking, frozen nowhere city with nothing going for it. You're wrong. Fargo survives precisely because it's nowhere, because it's cold, because it's surrounded by agricultural infrastructure and a population that understands self-sufficiency as cultural baseline. Start with population density. 125,000 people in Fargo proper, another 100,000 in the broader metro area. That's low enough that outbreak spread is manageable if you act fast. More importantly, it's surrounded by some of the most productive agricultural land in America. Wheat, corn, soybeans, sugar beets. The infrastructure to harvest, process, and store food exists locally. You're not dependent on supply chains. You're sitting on top of the supply chain, and the winter advantage is everything in the upper Midwest. Fargo hits -40 in bad winters. The zombies don't shamble at -40. They freeze mid-step. You get 5 months of environmental defense where the horde is neutralized, and you can systematically clear the region using snowmobiles and small tactical teams. It's not glory. It's methodical elimination of frozen targets that can't fight back. The geographic isolation helps in ways coastal cities never experience. You're 200 miles from Minneapolis, 250 from Winnipeg, surrounded by open country that provides early warning for any approaching groups. No surprise attacks, no sudden refugee surges overwhelming your defenses. Everything that comes at you, you see coming from miles away. But here's what kills the fantasy. Fargo survival is boring, brutal work. You're not building a new civilization. You're maintaining subsistence agriculture through extreme climate while defending against periodic zombie threats. It's 16-hour days of farm work, then defensive perimeter checks, then sleep, repeat. No restaurants, no entertainment beyond what you make yourself. It's survival that feels like punishment to people raised on convenience. And the isolation that protects you also means medical care is what you can provide locally, or you die from treatable injuries. Complex injuries, chronic conditions, anything requiring pharmaceutical intervention that you can't produce. You're assessing quality of life versus resource expenditure. It's the kind of calculation that separates survival communities from dead idealists. Survival rating, 7.5 out of 10, because the advantages are real, but the lifestyle is unsustainable for anyone who wasn't already adapted to rural hardship before the outbreak. Get the right population, and Fargo outlasts most coastal survivors. Get soft city people, and they die of despair before zombies ever become the primary threat. Number 5. Charleston, South Carolina. This is the counterintuitive coastal pick that makes people argue. Warm climate, higher population, East Coast location near major infection zones. Sounds terrible until you understand what Charleston actually has. The Port of Charleston, Joint Base Charleston with Air Force and Navy assets, and most critically, maritime access that means mobility when landlocked cities starve. Here's the tactical reality. Charleston has one of the busiest container ports on the East Coast. That means the infrastructure to load, unload, and move supplies exists locally. When the national grid collapses, Charleston can organize supply runs to abandoned coastal facilities. New York goes dark? Charleston sends boats to raid warehouses. Savannah Falls? Maritime recovery operations bring back everything useful before decay takes it. You're not isolated. You're the only functioning port between Norfolk and Miami. The military presence is Air Force and Navy, which means power projection and mobility, C-17s that can reach anywhere in the eastern U.S., naval vessels that can establish security perimeters and supply lines, attack and rescue helicopters that make defensive operations possible beyond your immediate perimeter. Charleston has the tools to organize regional survivor recovery, while other cities collapse into local chaos, and the geography provides defensive advantages people don't expect. The historic peninsula is water on 3 sides with limited access points. That's naturally defensible. The barrier islands off the coast provide fallback positions if the mainland becomes untenable. And the Atlantic provides infinite food through fishing operations when stored supplies exhaust. But the climate is the problem that never goes away. Southern heat and humidity accelerate decay, which helps thin the horde. But it also creates disease vectors. Standing water breeds mosquitoes. Decaying corpses breed plague. Sanitation becomes a survival priority that demands constant attention. You're not just fighting zombies. You're fighting cholera, dysentery, and a dozen other diseases that thrive when modern water treatment dies. And the population density is higher than other survivors' picks. 150,000 in Charleston proper, 800,000 in the metro area. That's manageable with ruthless early quarantine, but it requires leadership that makes hard decisions fast. Delay 72 hours, and you're defending against internal outbreak while also managing external threats. Charleston survives if command structure acts immediately and brutally. It collapses if anyone hesitates, hoping for federal intervention that isn't coming. Survival rating, 6.5 out of 10, because the advantages are real, but the execution difficulty is higher than cold climate alternatives. Charleston works if you get military organization and maritime supply operations running before social collapse. Miss that window and it's just another coastal city that burns. Number 6. Boise, Idaho. The geographic isolation play that trades coastal access for mountain barriers and internal sustainability. Boise sits in a basin protected by the Rockies to the east and high desert to the west. Getting there requires crossing terrain that fragments and filters refugee populations and zombie hordes. You're naturally protected by geography that makes approach difficult and visible from distance. The population is 235,000 in the city, 750,000 in the broader metro area. That's the upper edge of manageable, but it's spread across enough space that density doesn't become crushing. And critically, it's a population with high rates of outdoor recreation experience, hunting, and self-sufficiency mindset. These are people who already know how to camp, hunt, and survive without urban infrastructure. That cultural baseline matters when the grocery stores close forever. The agricultural capacity in the region is real. The Snake River Plain surrounding Boise is prime agricultural land. Potatoes, wheat, dairy, cattle ranching. The infrastructure to grow, harvest, and process food exists locally. You're not dependent on imported food after the first season. You're transitioning to local production with existing knowledge and equipment. And the climate provides a balance. Cold enough that winter slows the horde without being Alaska-level brutal. Hot enough in summer that bodies decay at accelerated rates. You get seasonal advantages without the extreme survival demands of northern climates. Defensive operations are feasible year-round with appropriate preparation. But Boise's weakness is the same as its strength: isolation. When something breaks that requires specialized parts or expertise you don't have locally, you do without. No industrial manufacturing base, no pharmaceutical production, no complex medical equipment repair. You're surviving with what exists in the region or what you can jury-rig from available materials. Long-term sustainability depends on accepting technology regression to 19th century baseline, and water management becomes critical in a high desert climate. The Boise River provides water, but managing it for agricultural and human needs without modern water treatment requires knowledge and labor. Screw up water sanitation, and you're dealing with disease outbreaks that kill as efficiently as zombies. Survival rating 7 out of 10 because the geographic advantages and agricultural capacity are strong, But the isolation that protects you also limits long-term technological sustainability. Boise works for communities ready to accept subsistence agriculture and 19th-century living standards as permanent reality. Number 7. Key West, Florida. The most controversial pick on the list because it looks like a terrible idea until you understand the tactical absurdity that makes it work. Key West is an island at the end of a 100-mile island chain connected to mainland Florida by a single highway with 42 bridges. That's not vulnerability, that's the most naturally defensible position in the eastern United States. Here's the tactical reality. You blow 3 bridges on the overseas highway, and Key West becomes unreachable by land. Zombies don't swim, they don't operate boats. They walk into the ocean and become waterlogged anchors. You've created an island fortress defended by salt water and 100 miles of isolation. Every approach is by sea or air, both of which require capabilities the undead don't have, and refugee groups can't organize. The population is only 25,000 permanent residents. That's the smallest population on this list, and the most defensible. Outbreak management is feasible with immediate quarantine. Social organization beats chaos because community size allows direct communication and coordination. You know your neighbors. That matters when survival depends on trust and cooperation. The maritime advantage is everything. Key West is surrounded by fishing grounds that provide protein forever. The infrastructure to catch, process, and preserve fish exists locally. The Gulf Stream brings nutrient-rich waters that sustain fishing operations indefinitely. You're not rationing stored food, you're eating fresh-caught fish as dietary baseline. Add tropical fruit production, and food security becomes achievable with effort. And the climate thins the horde through brutal decomposition rates. Bodies don't last in heat, humidity, and salt exposure. The environmental attrition rate for any zombies that do reach the Keys is measured in weeks. You're not fighting endless hordes. You're fighting waves that self-eliminate through decay faster than reinforcement can arrive. But Key West survival has 3 brutal realities that kill the unprepared. First, hurricanes. You're living on an island in Hurricane Alley with no mainland evacuation option. When the big one hits, you shelter in place or you die. Second, freshwater is entirely dependent on desalination and rainwater collection. Lose those systems and you're dead in days. Third, medical care is what you can provide with local resources, or people die from treatable conditions. The hospital in Key West is small. Complex medical intervention isn't possible long-term. Survival rating, 6 out of 10 because the defensive advantages are overwhelming, but the environmental vulnerabilities are equally severe. Key West works if you accept that survival means living on an island with subsistence fishing, constant hurricane threat, and technology regression. It's paradise for people who can handle tropical isolation. It's a death sentence for anyone who needs modern infrastructure to survive. So there's your list. 7 cities that actually survive when everywhere else collapses. Not because they're biggest, not because they're strongest, but because geography, climate, population density, and existing infrastructure create survivable scenarios when the dead rise and civilization falls. The pattern isn't random. Low population density beats high. Geographic isolation beats connection. Climates that kill zombies through environmental attrition beat moderate climates where the horde persists. Military assets that provide organization and supply capability beat civilian populations, hoping police forces save them. And most critically, populations that already possess self-sufficiency skills beat urban populations dependent on supply chains that stopped running. Here's the practical advice. If you're in one of these cities when the outbreak hits, you stay. You fortify, you organize, you contribute to defensive operations and agricultural development. If you're not in one of these cities, you don't try to reach them unless you have a specific plan, supplies for the journey, and a skill set that makes you valuable on arrival. Random refugees showing up at the perimeter begging for entry. That's how you break quarantine and collapse the survivor community. Don't be that person. All right, your turn. Which city on this list would you actually choose if the outbreak started tomorrow? Would you take the military infrastructure of Colorado's Front Range? The island isolation of Honolulu or Key West? The brutal environmental defense of Anchorage or Fargo, the maritime advantage of Charleston, the geographic protection of Boise? And more importantly, do you have the skills to actually contribute to survival in any of these locations, or are you dead weight hoping others carry you? No plot armor, no fantasy hero scenario, just honest assessment of where you stand. Drop your choice in the comments and explain your reasoning. Tell us which city advantages matter most to your survival strategy and which vulnerabilities you think kill the fantasy. If you're serious about apocalypse preparedness and tactical survival analysis that respects your intelligence, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We break down scenarios, dismantle fantasy solutions, and provide the strategic thinking that separates survivors from statistics. And remember, the cities that survive aren't the ones with the most people. They're the ones with the right combination of geographic advantage, population management, and environmental factors that make long-term survival actually possible.